That's part two of the song Kavodo by Shlomo Katz. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Tuesday coming out of Purim Katan, the little Purim that we're celebrating in first Adar. The real Purim will come next month in second Adar because it's a leap year. Side of the darkness. Starting a new wisdom candle. And who is with us as we gather to do another great daf? Yehudit in South Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in Indiana, Nancy in North Carolina, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, James in Indianapolis, Paul in the Great Northwest, Paula saying the Paula from Chicago. That's great. Stephen Guerre in Maine this week. David in Indiana, USA. Carrie in Santa Clarita, California. It keeps skipping on me. Miriam in Hayden, Colorado. Zach Plotzker in Vegas. Lucy in Minnesota. Bill in mid-Missouri. Welcome, everybody. Over on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia. Debbie in Toms River, New Jersey. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Lisa Gilman in honor of accidental Talmudist Sal, Nina, and 2022, may they be forever sweet and joyous. Amen. And Lisa, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Okay. So we've been a little spoiled these last few pages here in Tractate Chagigah. So much agadata, so much, incidents and stories and legends and philosophy and ideas and spirituality. So today we're going to get a little bit back to the business of the Chagigah, the actual festival peace offering and how it's distinguished from the burnt offering, etc. But there's other good stuff on the page as well. All right, we picked this up at the bottom of 5b. Here we are in chapter 1, still discussing Mishna number 1. And we recall, how do we open? It's everyone is obligated in the Mitzvah of Appearance with a whole bunch of exceptions, right? And so the Mitzvah of Appearance is to come to Jerusalem when the temple is standing 3 times a year, and when you come, don't come empty-handed. But there were many people, for different categories of people, who were exempt from that obligation. We pick it up at the bottom of 5b. The Mishnah taught, who is a minor who is exempt from the Mitzvah of Appearance in the temple? Any child who is unable to ride on his father's shoulders and ascend from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. And Rabbi Zera strongly objects to this. Who brought him here all the way to Jerusalem? If the father could bring his child to Jerusalem, why can't he bring him to the Temple Mount? Why is this defined as the child who is able to be brought from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount? Already there was a pilgrimage coming from who knows how far away in the Holy Land. Remember, these mitzvahs apply when the temple is standing. But the child was brought on the pilgrimage all the way to Jerusalem, and now they can't finish the journey up to the Temple Mount. Abaye said to him, we're on 6a at the top now, with regard to the way to here, right, to Jerusalem, as his mother is also obligated in rejoicing on the festival, so his mother brought him when she herself ascended to Jerusalem. But from this point forward, if he is able to ascend and hold his father's hand from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount, he is obligated, and if not, he is exempt, right? So you're not bringing little babies. There's the 2 definitions. Either it's a child who's big enough that he can walk while he's holding his father's hand, or he can ride on his father's shoulders, but that's bigger than a baby who's simply being carried by his mommy. And he is obligated, and if not, he is exempt. So it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, the one who compiled the Mishnah, responded in place of Beis Hillel that according to the statement of Beis Shammai, right, so the Academy of Hillel and the Academy of Shammai disagreed about a bunch of issues. This was one of them. that a child who is unable to ride on his father's shoulders is not obligated in the mitzvah of appearance. So according to that view, they must explain a verse that deals with Hannah. Who was Hannah? From Hannah, we learn how to pray, right? So recall that Hannah was one of two wives of her husband Elkanah, and she was barren. Her co-wife had a lot of children, and it was a source of tsuris, of distress to Hannah. And she kept wanting a child, and she couldn't have one. So one year she went up to the place where the temple, where the Mishkan, where the tabernacle was standing at that time. This was before the temple. And so offerings were being brought to the tabernacle, I think at that time in Shiloh. And she was praying so fervently that the high priest, Eli, thought that she was drunk. And she said, "No, I'm not drunk. I am just distressed and praying for a son." And he blessed her that she should have her prayer answered. And who was the baby that came from that story? The prophet Samuel. So now we're talking about Samuel, not as we usually talk about Samuel, the great prophet who anointed King Saul, but as a baby, right? So what do we learn? So there's a verse that deals with Hannah, Samuel's mother. So 1 Samuel 1:22, but Hannah did not ascend, for she said to her husband, "Until the child is weaned, when I will bring him." Because she made a promise that if she had a son, she would sort of give him over to the priests in the temple, and that he would be brought up in the precincts of the temple to a life of holiness and righteousness. But she wasn't going to give him up so quick, while the baby was still nursing. She wasn't going to bring him up to give him over to the priests. Right, so she said, but Hannah did not assent, for she said to her husband, "Until the child is weaned, when I will bring him." But Samuel was able to ride on his father's shoulders. The age of weaning is 24 months, before which Samuel was already old enough to ride on his father's shoulders, and yet he was not ready to ascend to the tabernacle. And this shows that only a child who is able to walk on his own is obligated in the mitzvah of appearance. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's father said to him, "According to your reasoning, ask about Hannah herself. Wasn't she obligated in the mitzvah of rejoicing and to be present in Jerusalem for that? Why didn't she travel to the tabernacle?" Or at that point, right, back then it wasn't to Jerusalem, it was where the tabernacle was. Why didn't she travel to the tabernacle to fulfill a mitzvah in which she herself was obligated? Rather, Hannah saw in Samuel the need for extra pampering, and she was concerned about Samuel lest he experience weakness from the journey, and since she was unable to bring him, the baby, she herself did not come. And Rabbi Shimon raises a dilemma with regard to so as his mother is obligated in rejoicing. So what is the note about the law of this little phrase? His mother obligated in rejoicing. One of the mitzvahs of the pilgrimage festivals is to sacrifice regular peace offerings in addition to the festival peace offerings. These regular offerings are called the peace offerings of rejoicing, and women are also obligated in this mitzvah. Some maintain that women are not obligated to bring this offering at all. Rather, they need only fulfill the mitzvah to rejoice, i.e., when a woman ascends with her husband to the temple, he must enable her to rejoice. And there is a dispute with regard to the opinion of the Rambam, as Maimonides, as some say he rules that women are obligated to bring the offering, whereas others maintain that according to the opinion of the Rambam, women fulfill the mitzvah by means of their husband's peace offerings of rejoicing. All right. So Rabbi Yehuda father said to him, according to your reasoning, ask about Hannah herself. Wasn't she obligated in rejoicing? And the answer was no, because she had to take care of the baby, Samuel, that needed extra pampering. And so she was not obligated since she was otherwise bound to take care of the baby. So Rabbi Shimon raises a dilemma. With regard to a minor who is lame, he has some kind of injury or disability, and yet he is able to ascend on his father's shoulders, according to the statement of Beis Shammai, and likewise a minor who is blind but is able to hold his father's hand and walk up the hill. So according to the statements of both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what is the law? Are these children obligated in the mitzvah of appearance? So we've learned that there's two opinions about when a child is old enough to be taken up and be part of this mitzvah. Either he can ride on the shoulders of his father, or he can walk and hold his father's hand. But we also know that a person, even an adult who is lame, is exempt from this mitzvah of appearance, and a person who is blind is exempt from it. So what about a child who's big enough to walk, be led by the father, but he's blind or lame? And the Gemara inquires, what are the circumstances of this case? If we say that it is referring to a lame minor who cannot be healed and a blind child who cannot develop eyesight, well, what's the dilemma? Now, if an adult in this condition is exempt from this mitzvah, is it necessary to ask about a minor? Since the minor will never be obligated in the mitzvah, even when he is an adult, there's no need to train him in its performance, right? That's why we bring children to do these mitzvahs. They're not obligated, but we're training them so that they'll know how to do it when they're old enough. And that's the source of their obligation to participate in it. Now, since this minor, so the Gemara explains, no, it is necessary to ask with regard to a lame minor who can be healed and a blind minor who can develop sight. He might be lame now, he might be injured now, but he will, be healed later, or he might be blind now, but he will develop eyesight later. So in that case, are we going to take him up now when he can ride on his father's shoulders or be led by the hand? And Abaye said, anywhere that an adult is obligated by Torah law, so one must also train a minor in that state of health by rabbinic law. Anywhere that an adult is exempt by Torah law, a minor in that same condition is also exempt by rabbinic law. Since in their current condition, an adult would be exempt, this child who is lame now, even though he might heal later, is exempt from the mitzvah. And likewise, this child who is blind now, even though he might develop eyesight later, is exempt from the mitzvah right now. Recall, that doesn't mean he's excluded. He can participate. His father might choose to bring him, but he's not obligated. The Mishna taught that Beis Shammai say the burnt offering of appearance, okay, har'iyah, right, har'iyah, right, so that is the burnt offering of appearance, right, you appear, so you come to fulfill your obligation to appear 3 times a year during the pilgrimage festival. And since you are not to come empty-handed, what are you bringing? An olah, right? So this is an elevation offering, the kind of offering that is offered up in its entirety on the altar. So with regard to this type of offering, this type of sacrifice, which is brought by a pilgrim when he appears at the temple on a festival, that it must be worth at least 2 silver coins. And the festival peace offering, that's the Chagigah, which gives its title to our tractate, it must be worth at least 1 silver ma'at coin. And Beis Hillel say the burnt offering of appearance must be worth at least 1 silver coin, and the Chagigah, the festival peace offering, must be worth 2 silver coins. So the sages taught in a baraisa that Beis Shammai say the burnt offering of appearance must be worth 2 silver coins, and the festival peace offering need only be worth 1 silver coin. And so the reason that the burnt offering must be worth more than the reason that the burnt offering must be worth more is that the burnt offering of appearance goes up entirely to God, which is not so with regard to the festival peace offering, as parts of that peace offering are eaten by its owner, other portions are consumed by the priests, and another part goes up on the altar, or at least its blood does. And furthermore, another reason for this difference is that we find with regard to the festival of assembly, i.e. Shavuos, that the verse includes more burnt offerings than peace offerings. So the sacrificial requirement of Shavuos consists of 1 bull, 2 rams, and 7 sheep as burnt offerings, but only 2 sheep as peace offerings. So if we learn out from Shavuos, sort of like when you're bringing offerings in the temple, how are you going to allocate the offerings that you're bringing in terms of the value that you're going to spend on them? Are you going to spend more on the offerings that are slaughtered and then consumed entirely on the altar? In other words, a gift to God. Or are you going to, allocate the majority of your, sort of sacrifice money to the offerings that you're actually going to eat a part of them, and so will your friends, and so will the priests. So according to this view of Beis Shammai, now you spend more on what goes to God, and we learn that out from Shavuos, where there's both kinds of offerings, but more of the value. There's more offerings that are going to God than the ones that are being eaten and shared. And Beis Hillel say, the burnt offering of appearance must be worth 1 silver coin, and the festival peace offering must be worth 2. So Beis Hillel, and we usually follow the view of Beis Hillel, they're saying that we would allocate more of our sacrifice money, as it were, to the offerings that we're going to eat, share with our friends and the priests, and a little less to what goes up to God. And the reason for this view of Beis Hillel is that the festival peace offering existed before the speech of God. What does that mean, the speech of God? It means before God spoke to the Jewish people, meaning when the 10 Commandments were given at Mount Sinai. So that's when the Torah was officially given. We think of it just the 10 Commandments were given, but it's really all one continuous process of God speaking to us from the top of Mount Sinai, and then the people being too terrified to hear all of the laws directly. Moses, you take dictation for us. Moses went up, was there for 40 days, and he received the whole Torah. So if he received the whole Torah, then, the laws detailing how certain offerings were given, there were offerings even before the Torah was given. We know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob made sacrifices to God. But the laws of the offerings didn't really become official until the Torah was given. But says Beis Hillel, but these types of offerings, festival peace offerings, they already existed before the 10 Commandments were given, before the speech of God. Which is not so with regard to the Mitzvah of Appearance, right? It's the Torah that said, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before me, and they shall not come empty-handed. That's the burnt offering of appearance. And furthermore, another reason is that we find with regard to the offerings of the princes during the dedication of the tabernacle, right? So all the laws were given, and part of that was the instruction of how to build the tabernacle. They took up a big collection, collected all the materials. Moses, called out, because God appointed him, Betzalel, the craftsman by name. They built the whole Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the wilderness. And then they, put the priestly clothes on Aaron and his sons. They inaugurated the whole thing. And then during the celebration of inaugurating the tabernacle, they had 12 days of celebration. And on each day, a prince, the leader of each one of the tribes, brought a whole bunch of gifts, and there's the same list of gifts that were given from every tribe, but probably with its own particular handiwork and beauty, and a bunch of offerings each day, bulls and sheep and goats and etc. Right? So when these offerings were brought on each of those days, when the princes brought their offerings, we find that the verse includes more peace offerings than burnt offerings. Whereas on Shavuos, we see that there's more burnt offerings than peace offerings. When the Mishkan was initially inaugurated, each of the princes on each day of bringing gifts brought more peace offerings than burnt offerings. So says Beis Hillel, we learn from that if you're going to allocate your money for sacrifices, you should do more for the burnt offerings that go to, more for the peace offerings that go, for yourself and your friends than what you allocate to the stuff that's consumed entirely on the altar and only God eats of it, as it were. And the Gemara asks, okay, so Beis Hillel, what is the reason that they don't agree with the opinion of Beis Shammai? I mean, Beis Shammai, their proof sounds pretty good. Why is it that Beis Hillel why did Beis Hillel reject the proofs of Beis Shammai? So with regard to that which you said, that the burnt offering of appearance is superior because it goes up entirely to God, and that's why you should spend more money on that. On the contrary, the festival peace offering is superior as it has 2 consumptions, one by God on the altar and another by the people, both the one who brings it and his friends and the priests who get to participate in it. And with regard to that which you said, or that Beis Shammai said, that we derive this law from the festival of assembly, meaning from Shavuos. So one could argue instead that one should derive the laws of the offerings of an individual from another offering of an individual, i.e. each prince of representing the tribe, but it was an individual who brought the offerings, and they weren't being offered on behalf of the whole nation. It was an offering that the prince brought on behalf of his tribe. So since we're talking about individuals who make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem during the festivals and what offerings they're supposed to bring, well, that's an individual bringing his offering, and so we should learn laws that were with respect to other individuals bringing offerings as opposed to communal offerings. We shouldn't learn the laws of individual offerings from instances of communal offerings. And so now the Gemara asks the reverse question. And what is the reason that Beis Shammai rejected the proofs of Beis Hillel, right? Beis Hillel made good arguments, as we've seen. Why would Beis Shammai reject those arguments? Well, Beis Shammai would respond like this. With regard to that which you said, that the festival peace offering is superior because it existed before the speech of God, well, the burnt offering of appearance also existed before the speech of God. According to the opinion of Beis Shammai, the Jewish people sacrificed burnt offerings at Mount Sinai before the giving of the Torah. They did bring burnt offerings that were entirely consumed for the sake of God, even before the Torah was given, and they did it at Mount Sinai. And with regard to that which you said, that one derives the laws of these offerings from offerings of the princes during the dedication of the tabernacle, well, one could argue that one derives the laws of a matter that is performed in all generations, i.e. the value of the different festival offerings, from another matter that is performed in all generations, i.e. the offerings of Shavuos, where there are more burnt offerings than peace offerings, and Shavuos is celebrated every year, and the Mitzvah of Appearance and bringing offerings is something that's done every year. But what we learn about the princess bringing offerings at the inauguration of the tabernacle, that only happened once in history. It's not going to be repeated. So why would we learn a law of something that happens every year from something that only happened once? That's Beis Shammai's argument. And the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, what is different about the festival peace offering? That it existed before the speech of God, as it is written, Exodus 24:5, and they sacrificed peace offerings of bulls to the Lord. And the burnt offering of appearance is also mentioned, as isn't it written in the same verse, and they sacrificed burnt offerings, right? All this been before the Torah was given. And the Gemara responds, well, Beis Hillel hold that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was the daily burnt offering. And that is a communal offering, as there were no individual burnt offerings before the giving of the Torah. And Beis Shammai hold that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was the burnt offering of appearance. And that is an individual offering. So Abaye said, Beis Shammai, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Yishmael all hold that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was a burnt offering of appearance. Right? The one you're commanded to bring when you're commanded to appear before the Lord. Those people were commanded to appear before the Lord at Mount Sinai. Beis Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yosei HaGalili all hold that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was a daily burnt offering, meaning the communal burnt offering of the population and not the offering of an individual. So the Gemara explains the source for each of the two sides of this debate. Beis Shammai is that which we said. Rabbi Yishmael, as it is taught in a Baraisa, that Rabbi Yishmael says general statements were said at Sinai, i.e., Moses received general commandments at Mount Sinai, including the 10 Commandments. And now we're on the B side of 6. And the details of the mitzvahs, in other words, the particulars of the sacrificial process, those were given to Moses at a later time in the tent of meeting. Right? So according to this view, Moses received the whole written Torah on Mount Sinai. But we also know that Moses received a bunch of laws that were the kernel of the oral tradition, which would enable him to understand how to fulfill the written laws, right? And the classic example is tefillin. In the Torah, it says, "You shall bind these words as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a symbol before your eyes." What does that mean? The idea that that would be tefillin, a black box with the black straps, that was also given by God to Moses, but it wasn't in writing, it was part of the oral tradition. Now, according to this view, those kinds of specifics of how to fulfill the written commandments, they weren't given to Moses on top of Mount Sinai. They were given to him over time during his prophetic moments, sort of receiving prophecy from God in the tent of meeting, right? So over time, while the children of Israel were still in the wilderness, Moses was continually receiving teachings from God. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, both the general statements and the details of the mitzvahs were given at Mount Sinai. And later, they were repeated in the tent of meeting. Moses continued to have prophecy. He would communicate with God in the tent of meeting. But the initial giving of even those oral teachings, those oral commands to Moses, that also happened at Mount Sinai, according to the view of Rabbi Akiva. So both general statements and details of mitzvahs were said at Sinai. Later, they were repeated in the tent of meeting, and they were reiterated a third time by Moses to the Jewish people in the plains of Moab, as recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, right? The final month-long sermon of Moses to the Jewish people when they were on the eve of entering the promised land. And if it enters your mind to say that Rabbi Yishmael holds that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was the daily burnt offering, that's a communal offering, rather than the burnt offering of an individual, well then the following question arises. Is there any offering that initially did not require skinning and cutting into pieces, as these details of the daily burnt offering were transmitted later in the tent of meeting, and ultimately, when these details were added, the offering required skinning and cutting? It is not plausible that the details of a mitzvah would change over time. In other words, the daily communal offering, there's a certain procedure of skinning the animal and cutting up its pieces, which we actually learned about when we were in Tractate Yoma. And we saw that procedure, there was like a whole procedure spelled out in the oral tradition. So the question that's being asked here is, well, are you telling me that daily offering was first given to Moses? Okay, God requires a daily offering, but God didn't tell Moses to instruct the priest how to bring that daily communal offering until later. So in the beginning, it was being brought in some kind of haphazard slipshod fashion, and only later God gave Moses the instructions of how to bring that daily communal offering properly? Of course not. It cannot be. It must be that God gave both the general written commandments and those specific, oral rules and regulations of how to fulfill the written commandments. All of that must have been given at Mount Sinai. And that's why Rabbi Akiva holds the way that he does. Therefore, it is clear that according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, the Jews did not sacrifice the daily burnt offering before the giving of the Torah, which means that the burnt offering sacrificed at Mount Sinai must have been a burnt offering of appearance. Now, the Gemara cites the source for the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. As it is taught in a Baraisa, it is a daily burnt offering, which was performed on Mount Sinai. Rabbi Elazar says the details of its performance were said at Sinai, but it itself was not sacrificed until the tabernacle was erected. Now, that sounds pretty sensible, right? So at Mount Sinai, the commands of the daily burnt offering were given, but so was the commands to build a tabernacle. We didn't have the tabernacle until we actually went through the process of building it. Priests, the laws of the priests were given at Mount Sinai, but the priests themselves were not anointed to serve as priests until the tabernacle was built, until the clothing of the priests was designed and manufactured, and when all the pieces were in place, maybe that's when they started bringing the daily communal offering. Rabbi Akiva says it was sacrificed when they stood at Mount Sinai, and its sacrifice never ceased. So Rabbi Akiva says, no, they started bringing that offering even before there was a tabernacle, even before the priests were anointed. God said, bring a daily offering. They started bringing it. So the Gemara asks, but if so, how do I uphold? In other words, how does Rabbi Akiva explain the following verse from Amos 5:25? Did you bring to me sacrifices and offerings for 40 years in the wilderness, house of Israel? Right, this verse is like an accusatory question indicating that the people in the desert did not bring these offerings. And the Gemara answers, no, you misunderstand. The tribe of Levi, which did not commit the sin of idol worship, right? They didn't participate in the golden calf episode. They sacrificed the daily offering from their own funds. Even though it's meant to be a communal offering on behalf of the whole Jewish people, the tribe of Levi, who restrained themselves from participating in the golden calf, they, from their own funds, brought the daily offering on behalf of the whole Jewish people. Since the rest of the Jewish people did not contribute the funds for the daily burnt offerings, it is as though they did not sacrifice this offering. And this concludes the list of sources of the opinions of those sages who hold that the daily burnt offering was not sacrificed at Mount Sinai, and the offering that was sacrificed there was the burnt offering of appearance. Now the Gemara cites the sources for the opinions that the daily burnt offering was sacrificed at Mount Sinai, that the burnt offerings given at Mount Sinai was establishing the communal daily offering, even before the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built. Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel, that which was said. We already established that Beis Hillel believes that it was communal offerings were being brought at Mount Sinai. Now Rabbi Akiva. Also, that which we said in the aforementioned dispute with Rabbi Elazar. We understand Rabbi Akiva thinks that the communal burnt offering was already being brought at Mount Sinai. What about Rabbi Yosei HaGalili? As it is taught in a Baraisa, the Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says the Jewish people were commanded to perform 3 mitzvahs when they ascended to the temple for the pilgrimage festivals: the burnt offering of appearance, the festival peace offering, and the peace offering of rejoicing. What are these called in Hebrew? Right? So the re'iyah, right? The re'iyah, similar verb to re'eh, to see. Right? So that's the offering of appearance. It's an olah. It's an offering that is burnt up entirely on the altar. The Chagigah, that's the festival peace offering. And the additional offerings of rejoicing, that's called the simcha. So Rabbi Yosei HaGalili continues. So there's about these 3 offerings. Now there is an element of the burnt offering of appearance, the re'iyah, that is not present in the other 2. And there is an element of the Chagigah, the festival peace offering, that is not present in the other 2. And there is an element of the peace offering of rejoicing, the simcha, that is not present in the other 2. Each of them has unique features. Makes sense? And he elaborates, Rabbi Yosei HaGalili elaborates, the element of the burnt offering of appearance that is not present in the other 2 is that the burnt offering of appearance goes up entirely to God, which is not so with regard to the other 2, right? So that's the offering. You bring it, it gets slaughtered in the temple. They cut it up in the right way, however it's necessary, and the whole thing goes up in smoke as a pleasing aroma to God. Now there's an element of the Chagigah, the festival peace offering, that is not present in the other 2. Why? Because the Chagigah existed before the speech of God at Mount Sinai. People were already bringing a Chagigah even before it was commanded in the Torah, which is not so with regard to the other 2. Right? The Re'iyah, the offering of appearance, only came into being when the Torah was given, and the one of Simcha also only came into being when the Torah was given. But the festival peace offering, it kind of makes sense, right? They had festivals to the Lord even before God said, these are going to be your festivals. In fact, Passover was celebrated before they got to Mount Sinai. We already had the Paschal lamb. We ate that in Egypt, right? And the Paschal lamb wasn't going to be enough to feed the whole house, so there was also a Chagigah. So the Chagigah pre-existed the giving of the Torah. Okay? And so the aspect of the Chagigah that is not shared by those other two offerings is that it existed before the Torah was given. And finally, there is an element of the peace offering of rejoicing, the simcha, that is not present in the other two, as the peace offering of rejoicing is performed by both men and women, which is not so with regard to the other two, which are only brought by men. And this shows that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili holds that the burnt offering of appearance, the re'iyah, was not sacrificed at Mount Sinai, which means that the burnt offering mentioned in that context, there was some burnt offering at Mount Sinai. If it wasn't the burnt offering of appearance, it must be that it was the daily burnt offering, the communal burnt offering of the population, and not the burnt offering of appearance, which is the offering of an individual. And the Gemara asks a question with regard to Abaye's explanation. And with regard to Rabbi Yishmael, what is the reason that you established his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai that the burnt offering sacrificed at Mount Sinai was a burnt offering of appearance, was brought by individuals? And the explanation for his opinion was, if it enters your mind that the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert was a daily burnt offering, is there any offering that initially did not require skinning and cutting into pieces and ultimately did require skinning and cutting into pieces? In other words, how could they bring an offering that later had a specific procedure before that procedure was given to the people, which only was given by God as part of the oral commandments, not in the written law? But wasn't it Rabbi Yosef HaGalili who said the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai was the daily burnt offering? Nevertheless, he holds that initially it did not require skinning and cutting into pieces, and ultimately it did require skinning into cutting pieces. He's saying, yes, they were bringing the communal daily burnt offering. They didn't yet have the knowledge that it would have to be cut and processed in this particular way, but they brought it anyway, and then later when God gave them the more specific procedures, so then they did it that way. What's wrong with that? Why can't there be a little bit of an evolution of that procedure? According to Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. Now, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili says, the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert did not require skinning and cutting into pieces, because the requirement of skinning and cutting offerings applied only from the time that God commanded this mitzvah in the tent of meeting and onward, given to Moses later during one of his prophetic sessions, not on Mount Sinai. So the Gemara concludes, there is no clear evidence as to what Rabbi Yishmael actually maintains in this regard, and therefore one should delete Rabbi Yishmael from this list here, i.e. the list of those who hold that the burnt offering sacrificed in the desert was a burnt offering of appearance, because he seems to agree with both sides. Rav Chisda raises a dilemma. This verse, how is it written? In other words, how should it be understood? Should the following verse be read as two separate halves with the first part consisting of? This is going to be a case of like, where do we put the comma, right? So Exodus 24:5. And he sent the young men of the children of Israel, and they sacrificed burnt offerings. Now this would imply that they were sheep. And the second part consisting of the rest of the verse, and they sacrificed peace offerings of bulls to the Lord, i.e. the peace offerings alone were the bulls. Or do we read it as both sets of offerings were bulls, right? So, and he sent the young men of the children of Israel, and they sacrificed burnt offerings, and they sacrificed peace offerings of bulls to the Lord. So are the bulls referring to both the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, or is bulls only referring to the peace offerings, and the first part, the burnt offerings, might have been sheep or goats? Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the two readings? Mar Zutra said the practical difference is with regard to the punctuation of the cantillation notes, whether there should be a break in the verse after, and they sacrificed burnt offerings, indicating that these offerings consisted of sheep, or whether it should be read And they sacrificed burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of bulls, all as one clause. I'm almost done. So if you've got questions or comments, get them in. And Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said that the difference between these two readings of the verse is for one who says in the form of a vow, it is incumbent upon me to bring a burnt offering like the burnt offering that the Jewish people sacrificed in the desert at Mount Sinai. So if he makes his vow like that, I'm going to bring the same offering that the children of Israel brought at Mount Sinai. So what does he bring? Does he bring a bull or a sheep? What is he required to bring? Were they bulls or were they sheep? And the Gemara does not provide an answer and states that the question shall stand unresolved. Teiku. All right. Much more technical page we had tonight. I did my best to keep it straight so that we could understand exactly what they were arguing. And I hope you could follow and enjoyed that Talmudic debate. All right, let's see if there are questions or comments here on Chagigah, page 6. Carolyn, do you think Moses naturally had perhaps a photographic memory? Wonder how many sages genetically have inherited a photographic memory, as the entire Torah would seem hard to commit to memory without one. It's a really good question, Caroline, because it's like, were they smarter than us? Were they more capable than us? Or was it simply that it was an expectation? And so they rose to the challenge, right? It's like, it was just expected that you would memorize it. That's why, by the way, that kind of sing-song nature and the cantillation that came into it later really helped them, right? So when you're memorizing not just the whole Torah, they memorized the whole Bible. Right? All the books of the Bible, they had that whole thing in their memory. And probably most of the Mishnah, if not all of it. And later most of the Gemara, which is truly an extraordinary amount. And we do see that there were some people, known for having all the teachings precise, and other people would rely on them since their memory was so good. Not everybody was blessed with an equally, talented, with an equal talent to memorize so much. But I think it was just part of the expectation. So I think you might ask, was it simply that, in the same way that nobody could break the 4-minute mile as a runner, and then somebody did, and now like high schoolers routinely break it? And is it because, now we have better nutrition and more vitamins and people just somehow are healthier? Or is it because, it's like once one person shows that it can be done, other people just accept, okay, it can be done, so let me find a way to do it, and then they would just do it. We're not sure, hard to know. But it is definitely the case that the sages had all of this memorized. It's truly incredible. And the reason why I think maybe like a lot more people could do it than we would imagine is because even today there are certain yeshivas in the Haredi, in the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva system, where they do still engage in that kind of memorization. There really is. And they just, they do it. Like they manage to memorize an extraordinary amount of scripture and rabbinic text. It's just amazing. And some of them are still doing it today. Tom, answering Caroline, it was chanted, which made it easier to commit to memory, especially if you heard it recited and recited yourself near countless times. Just so, Tom. And Yosef, is the phrase to see God and be seen, right? Because that was this idea, and we were seeing it yesterday, that was why a blind person, even one who's blind in one eye, is exempt from that obligation, because just as he's going to be seen by God, he's ordered to see God, and one who doesn't have the full vision is not included in that. He can come, right? He's permitted. He's just not obligated. So says Yosef, the phrase to see God and be seen, is this also a reference to seeing the Shekhinah taking the sacrifice? Was it visible to all Israel who were present in Jerusalem close to the temple? And I think the answer to that is yeah, right? Because we definitely had that teaching that it was one of the miracles of the first temple. In the second temple, it wasn't so much like that anymore. There were a bunch of sort of continuous miracles that were present in the first temple that weren't still there in the second temple period. One of them was that you could visibly see a manifestation of God. Obviously, it's not that's all of God, right? We're in God. The whole universe is within God. But God chose to make a manifestation of his presence visible, sort of like a crouching lion over the altar. And I think that I think it was also like that the Shekhinah would ignite the temple fire in the morning, right? The blaze on the altar. I seem to remember that was one of the miracles. And so, like you write, like see the Shekhinah take the sacrifice. I don't know that I would describe it in quite that way. But still, there was this idea that as these offerings were burning on the altar, and that smoke was rising, and the Shekhinah was over the altar, so it's like that smoke, it went sort of through that manifestation. It was more like a shimmer in the air, right? Like some kind of a beautiful shimmering. But yeah, they would see it. It was visible, right? There were other aspects of that miracle that were visible, and I think not just visible, but experienceable. You know what I mean? Like you would feel that presence of the Lord in the temple. In the same way that I kind of joke around that if you go to a NASCAR race, right, you don't just see the cars go by, you literally feel them because it's so intense. Visiting the temple was an absolutely intense experience. And it wasn't just because there was beautiful rituals and beautiful architecture there. There was something tangibly holy happening in the temple. May we merit to have Mashiach come and the third temple rebuilt in our times so that all of us can go to the Temple Mount. It will be a house for all peoples, right? Not just the Jews, a house for all peoples. And we can experience the presence of the Lord in the third temple. May the day come soon. Like today would be great. That's what I've got for us. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for Chagigah, page 7.